Job applicants who walked out of an interview before it was over? Why did you do it? Story 1. I never got as far as the interview. So much was wrong. I received a call asking me about my availability to attend an interview based on my posting on a professional website. I indicated that I was currently in the middle of a project but would be available to interview in 2 weeks. The woman on the phone yelled, "Then call me back when you're available." Click. She called me. She yelled at me. I wrote that company off. 2 days later, she called me again and asked to set up the interview. She said she would call me as soon as she had finished a meeting. You called me. Then you tell me you don't have time to finish the conversation that you initiated? Wrote her and her entire corporation off. Got a phone call 3 hours later. So-and-so, I want you to call her to schedule an interview on Monday. I definitely no longer want this job, but I do want to see if my predictions came true. I called on Monday. The person who answered the phone told me that it was the woman caller's day off. I am a genius. They call me and give me a runaround? What the hell? 2 weeks later. Yesterday, they called me again. Again, a person asks me to call at a later date to schedule an interview with a woman who couldn't bother to call me herself. I told them that based on their behavior in the past month on the phone, that I did not have any desire to work for their company. I broke my own code and fired off an email to the Director of Human Resources. This company is a luxury retirement community. There were golf courses, hospital clinics, 4 to 6 bedroom homes, clubhouses, townhomes, etc. It seemed like it might be a lovely place to work in my field. If they would treat me in such an unprofessional manner, how must they treat the residents of the community? There were 3 total callers involved. I can only imagine the motives for calling someone, asking for an interview, and then behaving in such a strange fashion. Nope. Do you think this one could be attributed to a clash between generations? Maybe boomers versus millennials? This person seems to think that everyone's just champing at the bit waiting for the next opportunity, while the person being called seems to have things well in hand. That's one of the best things about being a freelancer, having enough freedom and autonomy to say no. Story 2. I was really short on cash while waiting to hear back from a job interview with a company that takes a notoriously long time in the hiring process, and saw a job that was offering $25 an hour for some fire safety company. No other info. With a tagline saying, "Just because it seems too good to be true doesn't mean it is." I thought it was at least worth looking into. Went to the interview, which apparently was a group interview. The guy stepped out, and the first thing he asked was if anyone researched this company on the Better Business Bureau. A few people did. He spoke with them in another room, and then they never came back. Then he started to launch into his drawn-out story about the last 30 years of his life, how someone gave him the same opportunity he was offering one of us now, and that it honestly made him cry, thinking that people were so cynical that they would think he was a scam artist. And he actually did begin weeping in front of everyone, at which point his 20-something assistant ushered him out of the room before coming back and emotionally launching into his own story about how this guy saved him and was a genuinely great guy. Honestly, I didn't have a lot to do that day, and the interview was catered, so I stuck around to see what would happen when the guy came back into the room. And he did, with the vigor of an infomercial host, promising everyone that with a $600 deposit, they would be making $100,000 in 6 months' time. He just wanted a chance to interview each of us one-on-one. At the one-on-one, he started to talk a bit more about how this would be a great fit for me, blah, 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 and I just stood up, asked for the application I filled out, it had my personal information on there, told him that this was obviously and clearly a scam, that I hoped that there wasn't anyone dumb enough to actually write him a check. He called me a cynic and had his assistant escort me out. Just because someone's a cynic doesn't mean that it's not a scam. And I don't think this guy was being a cynic anyway. No interview is going to have you give them money for a job. Not even working as a waiter has you paying to work at a place. They pay well below minimum wage and you have to work for tips, but you don't have to pay them for the privilege of working. If anyone asks you that they need a deposit from you or money from you in order to begin working for them, that's a scam. Story 3. I accidentally walked out on an interview. I had driven 4 hours to apply for a bar/gaming room job in preparation for moving cities for study. I had purchased an apartment, so I kinda had to take job searching seriously. I had spent about 20 minutes talking to the gaming manager, during which time the venue manager joined us, when some guy came up to them and started chatting to them. I sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes wondering if the interview was over, when I decided that most questions had been asked and my existence had barely been acknowledged since the guy had rocked up. I half interrupted, shook one of the interviewer's hands and said thanks, and exited the premises with no idea how the interview went. Was crossing the road to my car when one of the interviewers chased me across the road and offered me the position. Turns out the guy interrupting the interview was one of the owners of the venue. I sometimes wonder how I get through life considering how socially inept I can be. I'm fairly socially inept myself at times, but even I know that one wasn't your fault. They should have at least said, "Oh, this is so-and-so, the venue owner," to you briefly before getting into a 5 to 10 minute conversation with him. They screwed up, not you, which is probably why they still offered you the job. You probably didn't answer anything wrong. Or better, you answered well. When he interrupted, what he said was, "My time is valuable." When he shook hands, he said, "Thank you for taking the time to talk to me." When walking out, he said, "I have other offers." This dude basically came in, swung his peen around, laughed, and walked away. That venue manager had a tear in his eye, remembering when he was a cocky little jerk. Best part is he didn't even know he was doing it. Curse my life. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. Truly, this was the way to work it. And it really was their fault. If they're not going to acknowledge this person, how are they going to treat him when he's an employee with the company? I hope he was able to get into a good working situation after this. I hope they treated him better than they treated him in the interview. Story 4. I walked out on an interview only once, and it was because the people organizing it were insane. They had arranged a large-scale interviewing process for the entire city. After getting there early, I realized there were quite a few applicants, so I didn't mind the fact that I had to wait for about 3 hours. Eventually, they asked a group of 3 of us into an office where we waited again for about 45 minutes. Again, I was happy just to have an interview, so I waited. Eventually, I met with a manager for the store who asked the standard range of questions, and I thought I did pretty well. At the end of the interview, though, I was asked to sign a waiver, and when I asked why, I found out that they had recorded the entire interview for the purpose of an episode of Current Affairs and didn't tell me beforehand. After waiting for so long just to be disrespected like that, I just walked out. I happened to catch the episode later, and it featured some of the people who I had waited with in the room. Thank God I didn't sign that waiver, because the angle of the investigation was that unemployed people didn't put any effort into getting jobs, completely ignoring the fact that everyone had to wait for hours just to get a chance. Too long didn't read? Got hidden cammed at a job interview for a TV show. So it was entirely a setup? Like not even an actual job to be interviewing for? That is so shady and horrible. Goes to show just how manufactured these news-type shows are. Story 5. I had just graduated art school with a design degree and was scraping by. Unemployed and living 500 kilometers from my hometown for 6 months. I was getting desperate and antsy when I saw an ad for a multimedia designer on a job board. I called and set up a time for an interview. I didn't have a car, so I called a cab to take me to the address. I was still relatively new to the city, and the cab took me very, very far out, like a half-hour drive. Eventually, the cab pulled over in front of a bland suburban house. Something was off. Even the driver was suspicious. "Are you sure you want to get dropped off here?" he asked, sensing my nervousness. I was confused. I didn't really know where I was. This was the era before iPhones, not that I could have afforded one, and my awful flip phone was dying. Yeah, sure. Just wait for me. If you see me go in, you can leave." I walked up to the front door, which had a sign with an arrow instructing visitors to go around back. As I walked alongside the house, I turned back and noticed that my taxi driver, assuming I was fine, had driven away. When I found the back entrance, I was greeted by 2 middle-aged, balding white men in a basement rec room that had been converted into an office. "I'm here for the interview?" One of the men got up. Yes, that's fine. We just need you to fill out a questionnaire. It should take 30 minutes. I looked to my left. A poster hung on the wall. The portrait of a vaguely familiar bald white man surrounded by a glowing rainbow of swirling colors and energy beams. It was L. Ron Hubbard. "Sure," I said. "I just have to let the cab driver know he can leave." I promptly proceeded to walk out the door, pick a random direction, and walk for 45 minutes along the road until I found a bus stop. Story 6. It was a security guard job. I was way overqualified but needed to pay the bills. Sat down across from a dead-eyed young woman who worked in HR. She read interview questions from a computer screen in monotone, typing my answers up as we went. Was kind of ticked and snappy. I answered all the questions really well, but sometimes she didn't feel it filled the exact questions. I'm guessing that she was really unhelpful. Like she would ask, "Please describe a situation or day where you and your coworkers were given an unexpected assignment, difficulty or mistake in how to multitask to balance the new workload with current duties." I went into detail about how that was a daily experience at one of my positions. Nope, didn't cut it with her. She stared blankly and said that didn't answer the question. Then she repeats the long question word for word. Keep in mind, she was reading the question right from the screen, so I get she was probably following specific instructions. As much a red flag about the company as her. Still, she was so rude about the entire thing. You could tell she really didn't want to be there. After trying to answer one question 3 times, each time she repeated the question like I was mentally challenged. She wouldn't even explain what I was saying wrong. I just apologized, saying I changed my mind about the job and walked out without explanation. Got a much better paralegal job 2 weeks later. It doesn't sound that bad, but you didn't hear the totally unjustified contempt in her voice. So uncalled for. I tried to kill it with kindness, but it just didn't work. It sounds like this person was acting pretty much as the HR person. I think this person was just letting in who she personally thought would fit the job. I'd be willing to bet no one knows how far she's taking her responsibilities in this. I think she's just using her judgment, and I don't think it aligns with anyone else in the company. Story 7. Too long didn't read? I couldn't actually walk out of the interview because I broke my foot. I graduated in 2009 with a degree in print journalism, and after a summer of doing random retail stuff, I decided to find a real job. I see a job posting for a marketing specialist, with emphasis in graphic design work. I brought my portfolio, and they told me they were impressed, and that I would get to do some design, writing, and editing. They said they represented big-time companies, so the 22-year-old me was incredibly excited. They told me to come back the next day for a job shadow, dressed professionally. I showed up bright and early in my nicest business clothes and heels, and they told me I would be riding with this red-headed girl. Side note, she started where I wound up working a few years later and didn't make it through training. I live on the north side of my city, and we drove all the way south to a residential neighborhood. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but they gave me a catalog and said we would be doing door-to-door sales for Sears Home Improvement. I made it 2 hours in the Midwest humidity dealing with ticked-off homeowners who didn't want to have their homes improved by Sears. While walking onto a driveway, my foot got caught into a rabbit hole, and I felt a snap. I couldn't put any weight on it, and told the red-headed girl I needed to go. She panicked, saying she needed to meet her quota for the day. I asked if we could take an early lunch, so we went to Arby's, where she and the rest of the sales crew left me with a swollen foot. I had to call my dad to pick me up. He worked an hour and a half away. He dropped me off at my car, and I drove with my injured right foot home. Yeah, that helped. Nope. I went to urgent care and discovered I had an avulsion fracture on the top of my foot. Yes, it was Matrix resources. Stupid. Story 8. I was finishing my degree in music education, and my university held a job fair for future teachers. It was great, and I actually landed my first job from it. School districts would set up little booths, and a representative would do on-the-spot brief interviews, looking to move selected candidates into the next round of applicants. There was one district from Indiana that just had a battery of questions they asked every applicant. I can't even remember why I wanted to talk to them, but I did. Several questions weren't applicable to a music situation, like what would you do if a student failed a test? What are your views of how you would address standardized testing in your classroom, etc.? The weird part was I would ask a clarification question, and the interviewer would look kind of annoyed and just repeat the question loudly. after 3 of those questions, I said, "Thank you for your time, but I have no interest in teaching in your school system. If this is how you treat prospective employees, I would hate to see the people that make it through the system and then get to teach kids." Story 9. I applied for a position as a manager of a restaurant. At the time, I was already a general manager at another restaurant, and I had years of management experience. They called me and asked to set up an interview, which I accepted. When I arrived 15 minutes early, I checked in and was told to take a seat, where I waited for 45 minutes past my scheduled interview time. When I was finally interviewed, the interviewer mumbled something about "stupid jerkwad servers," then grunted to me about how upset he was that a server was refusing to pick up a night shift. Then he used a bunch of derogatory terms for women about that server. As the interview progressed, he would start side tangents about his staff and past managers. He then told me that while I applied to a manager's position, they actually didn't have one available and that I could serve tables until a position became available. I asked when that might be, and he said maybe 6 to 8 months. I read him the riot act in front of staff and customers about how much of my time he wasted and how he should never talk about his staff like that and about his professionalism. 8 months later, the restaurant closed. Well, at least this person was proven right. His instincts were right on. This interviewer just gave up all the tea about how everyone was treated just by rambling on that way. This man learned all he needed to know. This one's pretty much a no-brainer. All the facts were just laid out in front of him just from this guy complaining. Story 10. I walked out of an interview before it began once. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m., which I double-checked from the voicemail that they left. I showed up about 10 minutes early, signed in, all that jazz, and waited, and waited, and waited. 45 minutes later, I got up, asked the receptionist, who looked seriously embarrassed, to let my interviewer know I was no longer interested, and left. 2 hours later, I got a rude call asking if I had forgotten the appointment. I had the opposite experience. Talked to a guy over the phone about a general labor job, and he told me to be at his shop at 6:30. He said that he was very strict about time, so I was there at 6:15 just to be sure. I got there the following day and proceeded to be screamed at for not being there at 6. I tried to be polite and say I must have misheard, even though I've never been so sure about something someone has said, but he insisted I was wrong and that I got out. Can't help but feel I'm better off not having him as an employer. Story 11. I was told about 40 minutes into an interview that the job I was interviewing for was going to be an 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. position. This had never been mentioned in the original job posting or in the preliminary call prior to the interview. This wasn't for a gas station job or anything either. High-profile law firm who basically needed a graphic designer to put together presentation materials overnight for use the following day. They also set it so that I'd be working hours just barely under the limit to qualify as a full-time employee with benefits. Again, none of this was ever mentioned in the job description up to this point. The last straw was that they gave me a 30-minute test to prove I could work on a deadline based on the actual materials I'd be working with. Chicken scratch post-it notes, unintelligible audio recordings, and other horrible sources I had to base my designs on. I walked out of the test about 5 minutes in. Story 12. Just after I had been given 3 months' notice of layoff due to office closure from a job that I really liked, I took off early one day for an interview across town. When I arrived, I entered a waiting room full of people at least twice my age, in suits, resumes in hand. Upon seeing this sight, I realized I had very little chance at the position being offered, but since I was there, I may as well try. What I didn't expect is that we were all scheduled to interview together. We were all herded into a conference room where the group interview commenced. After a few rounds of questions, learning each other's qualifications, how we would handle various situations, and so on, we collectively learned that this position was part-time, not what had been advertised, and paid a mere $9 an hour. I walked out along with 3 other people. Only 3? I guess other people were desperate for work. It kind of sucks that they were willing to put themselves through some kind of torture. This job obviously isn't going to treat anybody well. They're already lying to the interviewees. Story 13. I had placed my resume on a few job sites and accidentally left my resume open to the public. You should not do that. I had gotten a call for an interview for an insurance thing. I was young and lacked common sense, so I excitedly went. When I got there, there was about 20 other people waiting to be interviewed. Turned out to be a group interview where some handsome bleach-teethed dude talked about how great the job was, where we could set our own hours and make as much money as we wanted. All we had to do was pay a lot of money for their special training, and riches beyond our wildest dreams would come of it. Somehow the stupid slapped me in the face, and I got up from my chair and started to walk out. The con man asked me where I was going, and I calmly said, "This is a scam, and I advise others to walk out too." Story 14. The job was advertised as a morning shift. The interviewer starts to explain how I would be used as a wild card to fill in any shift that was needed, including short notice. Went to a job interview for a job at a huge high-tech firm on the West Coast. All it was a recruiter scouting for people. There were no interviews with any company. He just wanted to build my profile. He explained that if he found me a job, I would be an employee of his for 2 years before I would be an employee for the actual company. I wanted to bail out then. But as soon as he said I wouldn't have any benefits and minimum wage, I noped the hell out. Got up, grabbed my coat. I was shaking my head while putting on my coat, and as I was walking out, he said, "I'll just put you down as a lost cause." I'm familiar with headhunters and was working with 2 other headhunters at that time. His terms were just straight robbery. Story 15. I recently went to an interview for a bank in my area. First, the woman I spoke to on the phone misrepresented herself. She told me she was the assistant branch manager. Upon arrival, she told me she was the head teller. The branch manager would be arriving shortly. I waited for an hour. After an hour of me double-checking the time and wondering if I'd gotten there late instead of early, I got up to leave. The head teller said she'd be there in 5 minutes, but at that point I just figured I obviously wasn't important enough. I left. I got a call back 3 days later apologizing and asking if they could set up another meeting at a bank I was nowhere near. I politely declined. Again, the way they treat you in the interview is probably the best you're ever going to be treated. And they didn't treat this person very well at all. Lying, making the person wait? It seems like they just want to see how much junk you're willing to put up with so that they can take advantage of it. Straight up sucks. Story 16. I posted this a couple years ago, but may as well post it again for this thread. So, had an interview at a Starbucks for some kind of marketing or insurance company. The lady said they don't market themselves and they rely on word of mouth. Yeah, red flag number 1. Then, she said they weren't a pyramid scheme, even though it sounded like one. She said it was multi-level marketing. Red flag number 2. Red flag number 3. She got to the end of the interview and tried to have me sign up for their services. They were a company that supposedly sold insurance. Only I'd have to pay in order to have that privilege. She wanted me to put in my credit card number and a bunch of info, including my social security number. I excused myself, thanked the lady for her time, and left. Story 17. Back in high school, I had an interview at Cold Stone Creamery. They made us break into groups where we had to create and sing a catchy tip song. I'm really shy, so I wanted to walk out before the singing commenced, but I really needed a job, so I decided to try and stick it out. I sang a stupid song. After the songs, they interviewed us one by one. For one question, they basically asked us what we thought the weaknesses of our group members were. I told them I didn't know the people well enough to say, and that I really didn't want to get a job by bad-mouthing someone else. As I got up to leave, they asked me if I wanted to hear what some of my group members had said about me. I just kept walking. Should have gone with my gut and left before the singing. Story 18. I went to a job interview while employed at my current company. A company that is safe, with great coworkers and a laid-back, fun environment. However, the salary was less than industry average and a long commute. So I applied at another place. As I'm in the interview, it's going great, but then the reality of leaving my current job hits like a ton of bricks. I start babbling questions I was using before, and then I realized I just wasn't ready to leave yet. I knew me leaving would hurt the company immensely, and that leaving would hurt people I know considered more friends than coworkers. So I told my interviewer, and he understood completely. He saved my record on file and ended the interview on a good note. Story 19. Are you deciding to have any kids soon? We'd rather not hire you than have to fire you when you're knocked up. I was 15 at the time. Another time, I was around the same age. I was being interviewed for a babysitting job. All of a sudden, she hands me a sheet of chores, including making dinner and being a waitress for the parents, cleaning the chimney and gutters. Laundry had to be washed, folded, and put away, cleaning toilets and times. Every room had to be vacuumed. She then said that the kid would be in daycare so I'd have plenty of privacy. I just left. Story 20. Too many leading questions. Not stuff that would be illegal, but would get the same responses. So, how do you spend your weekends? What's your Sunday morning look like? Sunday morning? I like to wake up early, have some coffee, make a healthy breakfast for myself and the people I love. Then I put on some nice clothes and go to my lawyer's office. We like to discuss various places I have interviewed and been asked by the interviewer about my religious beliefs. Story 21. Them. We have a very dedicated team. We often stay after normal office hours. Is that okay with you? Me. Sure. I'm single without kids, so if it's adequately compensated, I'm happy to do as much overtime as necessary. No problem. Them. Oh, no. We're passionate about the work we do here, so overtime is not paid. Me. Okay then. Thank you for your time, and goodbye. Story 22. I walked out about halfway through because the dude was too busy on his phone. I thought maybe he was recording my responses on his phone. Then he laid the phone down on the table to write down some of what I was saying and noticed it was his Facebook open. I got up and walked out. I had a feeling he wasn't paying attention to anything I was saying. The dude was the head paramedic or whatever at the ambulance company I applied to. I just imagine people are unaliving in front of his face while he's using his Facebook. Story 23. They flat out lied to me about what I was interviewing for. I was told it was for a technician trainee position, but it was really for an unpaid internship that had 12-hour days and a mandatory 6-month period before I could move on to a paid job, which would have started out at $11 an hour. When I was told, I just told him it wasn't worth my time and got up to walk out. He got all mad and said, "Son, you have to show your worth first." And I just said, "Sir, I have stupid bills to pay. And as much as I'd like to conform to your wishes so that I could have a career, I don't live in a fantasy world where I can just focus on work." Story 24. I went into the interview with my prospective supervisor. I looked around the office and noted that the garbage cans were full, the walls and carpet dirty, and the supervisor's desk was old and had chips out of it. So I mentioned that the company didn't seem to be doing any basic upkeep, and then asked point blank, "Is this a good company to work for?" She replied, "No," and hung her head. I said, "Thanks," and walked out. Story 25. I was an actor in LA and got called in for a Scientology commercial. I went mainly because I was curious. I went into the room, sat down, and then immediately got up and left. I apologized and everything. I wasn't a peen about it. I just couldn't take money from those people. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.